50,000 people used to live here. Now it's a ghost town.
Hello everyone, welcome to another video. Today we're going to be doing the start bench recommendations. For those of you who are involved in the weekly contests we do, the winner has already been determined, so we're not really going to go over that this week. It was Jackson Smith-Njigba, wide receiver for the Seahawks, for who my contender was going to be. But either way, let's get right into the start bench recommendations here. Before we actually get into it, there's two people that actively play that I don't have any recommendations for this specific week, those people being Pussy and Rick Tatership. So if your name was just mentioned, you might want to skip to the free agency part of the video. Other than that, everybody else had a recommendation or two, so let's get right into it, and we'll kick things off with MILF. MILF, keep an eye on Colts linebacker Zaire Franklin. If he starts, then I want you to bench Shaquille Leonard. I would recommend you bench Shaquille Leonard, the linebacker. And I would start Rudy Ford. Because Shaquille Leonard in the game where Zaire Franklin was playing really hasn't been consistent in the slightest this season, and I would not recommend starting him overall, just because I do think Rudy Ford will probably outplay him. Especially if Rudy Ford does play. Keep in mind, obviously don't start Rudy Ford if he's out, but if he does play, I do think he'll outplay Shaquille Leonard as long as Zaire Franklin does play, if he doesn't keep Leonard in. And then either way for this one, I would say to start Grant Delpit and to bench Jason Pinnock. Grant Delpit has just been more consistent throughout the whole year. He had a bad week 3, and that's about it. Other than that, he's been good for at least 10, 11 points per game plus. He's a very consistent option when it comes to fantasy. Jason Pinnock has just been all over the fucking place. He had 3 good weeks. The rest of them have been kind of mid at best. A lot of them have been pretty bad, to be honest. Overall, I would say that at least 4 times out of 5, Grant Delpit's going to outscore Jason Pinnock. Jason Pinnock just had those few upside weeks. So if you're MILF, I'm basically saying to put both of your backup safeties in and then to bench one of them and then bench Shaquille Leonard if he happens to play and then move the safety in at the D spot. If you would have listened to my advice last week, I don't feel like explaining the math to you, but I'll tell you everyone I recommended. First of all, I recommended you started Mac Jones and benched Bryce Young. This would have lost you 1.92 points. If you would have listened to that, Mac Jones ended up having an okay game for his standards. He sucks, but at least it would have been an okay game. He had a total of 14.10. Definitely could have been better. I'd say it's on the verge of a bad game, but either way, it's better than a lot of the weeks Mac Jones has had. Bryce Young had 16.02. So yeah, this would have lost you just a little bit over, just about 1 point or so. 1.92, I do believe. Anyway, then I also recommended you start Hassan Reddick and bench Nate Landman. This would have lost you 14 points. So that would have put you in the hole quite a bit. But to counteract that, I did make another recommendation for you, where I recommended you started Grant Delpit and benched. I recommended you started Grant Delpit and bench Jason Pinnock, just like I am this week. Last week, Jason Pinnock scored 7 points. Grant Delpit scored, I believe, 23.25, so that puts it back to 14. And if you've been doing all the math here with the positives and negatives for how much everything's worth, from those recommendations I just said, the final total is if he would have listened, he would have gained a net positive of an additional whole 0.33 points. So, MILF, if you would have watched the video and you would have listened, you would have earned a whole third of a point. You're welcome, buddy. You can pay me at the end of the day. I accept tips. Anyway, a win's a win. Then we're going to take a look over at Booty Basher. Booty, I have a lot of recommendations for you this week. This week, I recommend you bench Dallas Goedert because obviously he's on a bye. And out of your tight end options, I would suggest Gerald Everett just because he does have that upside, even though I'm not a fan of him, and I do think he's kind of in a bad situation right now. At least you can make the argument that there's nobody else for them to get this ball to. I don't know. It's very hard for me to not see him getting the ball, at least. It's hard to trust Jawan Johnson. In either way, Dallas Goedert's on a bye week, so this should at least get you some points if you actually set your team. I recommend you start Christian McCaffrey and you bench Tua, because Christian McCaffrey is arguably one of, if not the best option in all of fantasy, and Tua's on a bye week. I recommend that you start Deebo Samuel and bench Gabriel Davis. And we'll get to DeAndre Swift. I know he's on a bye, but I recommend you start Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel, for the games he's played this season, has looked like a borderline wide receiver one, except for the games where Brock Purdy was selling his ass. Cough, cough, the last game where he had 1 point. But to be fair, he did get hurt in that game, so you can't really count that against him. He has been one of the highest scoring receivers on a per game basis, though. And I definitely do think he'll have a better game than Gabe Davis, who's been all over the fucking place. He's certainly a lot more trustable than Gabe Davis, who in the last 3 games has only had one game over 2 points, which is definitely concerning. Yeah, I just don't like that consistency valve there, and I'd go for Deebo Samuel here because I do think he'll probably outscore Gabe Davis, especially with that lack of consistency Gabe Davis has been showing. I recommend you start Derrick Henry and you bench Latavius Murray, and we'll get to DeAndre Swift. But I recommend you bench Latavius Murray because this dude has not put up I think, over 5 points since week 6. And yeah, your other option is Derrick Henry. You're going to take Derrick Henry over Latavius Murray any day of the week. The guy has just been balling out all season except for week 3. So you should probably take your free points, to be honest. And then I would recommend you start DeAndre Swift or you bench DeAndre Swift and start DeAndre Hopkins. The reason I'm saying start DeAndre Hopkins instead of Gabriel Davis or let's say Juwan Johnson, God forbid you're questioning why you're not putting in Juwan Johnson. The reason for that is I do think DeAndre Hopkins is going to be getting some help with Will Levis. At least Will Levis takes his shots. In the games he's played, DeAndre Hopkins has gotten significantly more volume compared to when he had Ryan Tannehill. And even though he only had 4 catches for 60 yards this last week, he actually had 11 targets, which is really fucking good. And he is going up against a Tampa Bay defense that has allowed the second most fantasy points to wide receivers this season. So I do think I prefer that matchup instead of Gabe Davis, who always has that chance of getting locked up by Sauce Gardner. So either way, those are the recommendations I got for Booty Basher here. Last week I recommended you bench Latavius Murray and started Derrick Henry. This would have earned you 19.2 points if I'm not mistaken. No, I'm sorry, 17.2. Derrick Henry had 19.2. And then you saw Latavius Murray only get the 2 points, so that would have earned you 17.2 if you would have listened. Latavius Murray, I say it every week, is cuttable at this point if you're Booty. I also recommended you start D-Hop and bench Romeo Doubs. D-Hop ended up putting up, I want to say, 10 points. I think we were just looking at it. 10.5, while Romeo Doubs put up like 6, something like that. He put up 660. So that would have earned you an additional 3.9 points. And if you do the math, that would have earned Booty Basher 21.10 points if you would have listened. So overall, on a somewhat serious note, that would have earned you quite a few points if you're Booty Basher. And we're 2-0 so far on the positives. We're getting better. Then we'll go ahead and look at Toxic Zenpai. With Toxic, I only have one recommendation for you this week, and it's actually the exact same one I recommended you last week. I recommend that you start Kenneth Murray and bench Jamin Davis. We'll just look at last week. If you would have listened to my advice on this last week, you would have earned 1 net point more because Jamin Davis had 14, Kenneth Murray had 15. Overall, you can look at the stats for the last 4 weeks and then even weeks 2 and 3. He had the bad week 4 and week 1. Where Kenneth Murray's just been a hell of a lot more consistent than Jamin Davis overall. Jamin Davis has been kind of all over the place throughout the second half of the season here. He started out great, but yeah, it's very hard to trust this guy. I would say that Kenneth Murray is probably going to outscore him 9 times out of 10 for the rest of the season. So that would be my recommendation for Toxic. Then we'll go right ahead and look at Big Yawners. Big Yawners, I recommend you start Jermaine Pratt and bench Devin White. Now, there's a big reason for that. I do think Devin White and Jermaine Pratt are kind of in similar situations where they're both the secondary tackler when it comes to their linebacker core, so a lot of the times they do kind of get put on the back burner. But I do think I still recommend putting in Jermaine Pratt over Devin White, and here's why. Devin White is going to be going up against the Titans, which isn't necessarily a bad matchup for linebackers, but Devin White has been all over the place and has gotten outscored by Jermaine Pratt by a total of 30 points so far this season, so there's that. And on top of that, if you look at what Devin White just did against Houston, he had 21.5 fantasy points out of 9 tackles and a sack. Houston has given up the 9th most points to linebackers in fantasy this season. And look who Jermaine Pratt just so happens to be playing. You just saw it for yourself. You saw how reliable linebackers tend to be against Houston. Please start Jermaine Pratt over Devin White. I can't guarantee you, but I am feeling very strongly that Jermaine Pratt will outscore Devin White this week. I do think it'll be a really good week for Jermaine Pratt. Then we'll go right ahead and look at Mr. Steeler Girl. With Mr. Steeler Girl, I recommend you start Jordan Whitehead and you bench Daron Payne. By the way, with big yawners, I didn't have any recommendations for him last week. I recommend you bench Daron Payne because with the loss of Chase Young and the loss of Montez Sweat, it's hard to say how good these defensive linemen will be. For the 1 week sample size we had, Daron Payne only put up, 1 tackle solo, 2 total points, 2 tackle assists. Yeah, it's very hard to trust him. He's been all over the place this season. I just don't think he's very trustable. Either way, I would definitely start your safety, who's probably going to be a good around 10 points every week. Sure, Jordan Whitehead has that lower or amount of points where he can score around 5, but I do think 9 times out of 10 he's probably going to outscore Daron Payne for the rest of the season moving forward. That's why I'd recommend that. And I didn't actually have any recommendations for Mr. Steeler last week either, so we'll move right on to Karen's husband. With Karen's husband, I recommend you start Josh Dobbs and bench Johnny Test, a.k.a. Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson has just been horrible this season all around the board. There's just no way around it. It's very hard to find upside. He had a solid game against the Chiefs. Outside of that, he's looked like shit this season. Josh Dobbs, it's kind of hard to argue with the stats he's put up. He's put up over 20 points in, I believe, 5 or 6 games this season. Do I think he's a great quarterback? No, but do I think he's at least able to get fantasy points? Yes, especially since he has Jordan Addison to work with. Now you can say Zach Wilson has Garrett Wilson, but Zach Wilson just fucking sucks at football. That's the best way I can put it. Then I recommend you start Alex Anzalone and bench Jerome Baker because Jerome Baker's on a bye week, and Alex Anzalone is your only linebacker you have. And I also recommend you start a Caleb Evans and bench Nick Scott. Nick Scott has been horrible, to say the least, outside of the 3 of the first 4 weeks of the season. He's just been getting outshadowed by everyone on that defense overall. He had an okay week this previous week, but still, he's only getting 4 tackles solo. I don't think he really has that upside anymore going forward. I think he just kind of had a few lucky weeks at the beginning. It's very hard to trust this guy, seeing as he is actually splitting snaps with another safety, too, on top of this. His name's Jordan Battle. But it's very hard to trust this guy overall. And I'd start a Caleb Evans just because Caleb Evans has had those occasional upside games where he's able to get 15 points or so, close to 10. Either way, he definitely seems like he's going to be more consistent with higher upside than Nick Scott at this point. And that was actually my only recommendation I had for you last week, was to start a Caleb Evans and bench Nick Scott. A Caleb Evans had 15, Nick Scott had 10. This would have earned you a net positive of 5 fantasy points. So we're 3-0 on our positive picks so far. I'm cooking up, that's what I'm saying. I get better as the year goes on, but either way, looking pretty good. Got you 5 points last week if you would have listened. Then we'll move on to, I don't have any recommendations for dictatorship. We'll actually move on to Justin Likes Kids. With Justin Likes Kids, I recommend you start Joe Mixon and bench Raheem Mostert, because Mostert's on a bye week and Mixon's your only option. I do recommend that you start Garrett Wilson and you bench Patrick Mahomes, because Garrett Wilson, again, is your only other option. I would go through the points, but he literally has no other options, so I'm just going to kind of scheme through it. Mahomes is on a bye week as well. Then I also recommend that you start Dre Greenlaw in at your linebacker spot that you've been leaving open for Casper the Friendly Ghost. I recommend you start Kaiser White and you bench Reed Blankenship by putting Antoine Winfield at your DB spot there, and then putting Antoine Winfield at the DB spot, and then Kaiser White at the D spot. And then I recommend that you also, that's actually it. Those are the only recommendations I have for you this week. If you look at the recommendations from last week I had for B-Dog here, I recommended that he started Joe Mixon and benched Jared Goff, because Jared Goff was on a bye week. This overall would have earned earned Justin Likes Kids 17.8 fantasy points positive. Then I also recommended he started Azeez Al-Shaair. This would have earned him another 13 points. This would have taken him up to 31 total points. I actually forgot to mention one thing, that he actually got another additional point from something else I recommended him. I'm trying to think what that was. I'm actually not certain off the top of my head. I recommended he started Kaiser White and benched Jaquan Brisker. This would have earned him another, I believe that would have earned him another 13 points. And yeah, overall, if you do the math on everything, it would have earned him a net total of 44 additional fantasy points had he have listened to my advice or just set his team in general. But I don't want to take credit for that one just because, B-Dog doesn't set his fucking team, so it kind of makes it really easy. So I can't take too much credit for that, but I'm technically still undefeated when it comes to the positives for the week. Then we'll look at Scrambled and Wiggle Waggled. With Scrambled, I recommend this week that you start the Terrell Bernard guy for Buffalo if he plays. If he doesn't, then ignore this. But if he plays, start him and bench Pete Werner. Pete Werner has just been mid at best all season. He had that one good game week 3. Other than that, he's been mid. Terrell Bernard, on the other hand, ever since Matt Milano's been out, has been a fucking beast in fantasy outside of the week where he just got hurt against Cincinnati. So definitely would recommend Terrell Bernard over him. He's probably going to outscore him as long as he plays. Last week I recommended Scrambled and Wiggle Waggled started Las Vegas and benched Dallas. And Las Vegas actually had 67.30 points while Dallas had 24.10. So if Scrambled would have listened to me, he would have earned 43.20 points in the positive, which overall that makes me undefeated this week. I'm getting a lot better at making these start bench recommendations. Granted, some of these people aren't really setting their team, but for what it's worth, my advice has been pretty solid for the most part. And either way, let's look right into the free agency side of things here. Oh, I hate Puerto Ricans. Anyway, this is where the intro takes place. I'm not going to lie, guys. I kind of struggle to find some people here. The free agents are fucking awful right now. Around the board for almost every position, there's a few players that I'd probably say are a bit better than the others here on this list, but damn, these guys suck right now. First of all, we'll get to the quarterback room, and if you want a quarterback, well, you're shit out of luck. If you need one this week, you have Tommy DeVito, who's fucking, yeah, it's Tommy DeVito. I can't tell you he's going to do anything good, guys. I don't know who the fuck this guy is. He's probably not good at football. There's a reason he was the Giants' quarterback 3. It's all you guys have for this specific week, and I don't know what Tyrod Taylor's injury is looking like, so maybe he starts for the rest of the season. I don't know. It's about the best I can give you because, goddamn, these guys are horrible. These guys suck that are on free agency right now. Then the next recommendation I would have for you guys is going to be Carson Wentz. Because if Matthew Stafford ends up missing any future time following week 10, so starting week 11, Carson Wentz would be the new guy to start. And if you put Carson Wentz in there, he would have the upside of having Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp on the same exact team. So he would at least have some solid upside. And it's the only guy that actually has an argument for starting within the next 2 weeks. So it's about all I can offer you guys, to be honest. Like I said, the free agency side of things suck right now. I cannot lie to you guys. It's just very, very fucking hard to find anyone good. Carson Wentz and Tommy DeVito are about your only chance, and Tyrod Taylor is actually sent to injured reserve. I'm looking at it now. Then we'll look at the running back side of things, and things are a little bit better here, but not much. First of all, we have Tajay Spears, who actually can go in there and be a startable running back with some touchdown upside potential, but he hasn't really gotten too many touchdowns this season. He's getting some solid yards per carry, and he's mostly getting receptions, which are helping him. Plus, he also is getting return yards from time to time. So, overall, he's finding ways to at least get some fantasy points on every single weekly basis, which is better than I can say for pretty much anyone else on the free agency list. There's a few guys here and there, like your Ezekiel Elliott's, for example, that will get a few points, but Tajay Spears is overall outplaying them, to say the least. It's probably better than anything else on here when it comes to the running backs. And then this is a shot in the dark. I'm going to be the first one to tell you guys full transparency. I don't like Keaton Mitchell. I don't think he's going to be as good as he did in this previous week. I don't think he's going to be as good as those 43% of people who just picked him up this last week are expecting him to be. But in the 1 week we've seen him actually share snaps with Gus Edwards and Justice Hill, he did put up 31 fantasy points, ran 9 times for 138 yards and a touchdown. That is a spectacular performance, so I can't deny that. Do I think he'll do it again? No, but he has the upside to, which is a lot more than I can say for pretty much anyone else at this time at the running back position. So keep an eye on this guy. Maybe pick him up if you have the free agency, or if you have the free spot on your roster. But overall, the running back room is kind of sad right now. Then we'll look at the wide receiver. The wide receiver room really isn't much better. The first guy I'd actually recommend is going to be Zay Jones. Uh, this isn't the this is probably the second favorite option I have here. I do think he'll be more consistent out of the two. We've only seen him play twice this season. He has been dealing with injuries all season. But in the 2 games he played, he was able to reel in a touchdown for both of them because he is on a very high-powered offense, which means he does have a lot of coverage drawn off of him, dealing with Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk. So overall, I do think he's probably going to be a bit better than the options you can find on free agency for the most part. But there is one guy I personally think will be a bit better, but I cannot promise you. With this guy, I just do know he has some upside based on previous years, but it's entirely on how his new quarterback will play, and his new quarterback being Kyler Murray. We're going to look at Rondale Moore here. With Rondale Moore, he really hasn't been anything special this season. You'll get no argument from me. But with the loss of Josh Dobbs and the addition of Kyler Murray, I do think Rondale Moore's upside can only go up. And for what it's worth, last season, whenever DeAndre Hopkins was suspended for the first 6 games, if I'm not mistaken, and Marquise Brown was the wide receiver 1, so basically the same situation they're in now. Rondale Moore was having games where he's putting up 15 to 20 points per game. Am I saying he's for sure going to do that? No, I can't tell you. Fucking Kyler Murray's been playing Warzone all offseason instead of studying the film book, so I couldn't tell you what's going to happen. But I have seen the upside of the combination happen before. So it's just a warning that this guy could actually be a pretty solid wide receiver moving forward, but I wouldn't bank on it. That's the main thing I can tell you about all these free agents this week, is they fucking suck. So do not bank on them, but keep an eye on them. That's pretty much all I can say. Because yeah, this whole free agency side of things is kind of dog shit for this specific week. And I'm expecting it to not really get too much better unless somebody gets hurt or something like that. Then we'll look at the tight end room. The first guy I'd recommend has got to be Cade Otton. Over these past 3 weeks, he has found a way to put up around 8 points per game. This last week, he had 2 touchdowns off of 6 catches for 70 yards. He's had at least 4 catches for the last 3 games. He's finding ways to put up fantasy points, whether it's 2-point conversions. His last week, he could have done even better if he didn't lose a fumble. But he is gradually gaining the trust of Baker Mayfield, it looks like. So he is starting to become more of a receiving target for those Buccaneers. But overall, I don't think he's an amazing option, but I do think he's probably the best you can get on free agency for these upcoming weeks. But at the end of the season, though, I would actually turn your attention to Pat Freiermuth, who does probably have more upside than anybody else on the tight end room here. But you'll have to wait until all the way up until, week 11 to actually use him. So another 2 weeks, but even then it's not promised he plays in 2 weeks. It's just whenever he's projected to get off of injured reserve. But he does have higher upside than those guys, so I'd say he's probably going to be better than them. Then we'll look at the kicker side of things. With the kickers, I would look at Greg Zuerlein first. Greg Zuerlein had a few bad games in week 2. He was hurt. He had 2 bad games for weeks 3 and 4. And even then they weren't horrible. But he has had quite a few games of upside to counteract that. The weeks 5 and 6 where he had 20 and 18. He's had pretty consistent games outside of that where he had around 10 points, 9, 10, and 13 for weeks 1, 8, and 9. So he is looking like he has some solid upside overall. Plus, he is looking like he has a decent level of consistency. He did have those 2 bad weeks, but overall, as long as the Jets can get into field goal range, which has been a struggle this year, I'm not going to lie, but as long as their defense can accidentally force a turnover or some shit, the Jets ain't going to score a touchdown. So Garrett Wilson pretty much has promised field goals at that point. Then we'll look at Cameron Dicker. Cameron Dicker over these past 2 weeks has looked pretty damn good at kicker. And he's not the best option in the world, but for what's on free agency, he has been making a lot of field goals, especially in these last few weeks. He had 3 2 weeks ago. He had 2 in this last week. He's getting a lot of extra point attempts. Overall, the Chargers aren't really moving the ball as well as they'd hope to with Austin Eckler playing through the injured finger. They're missing Mike Williams. They're missing Josh Palmer. Overall, this offense is starting to struggle a little bit, but with the help of Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler overall, even though he does have that finger injury, and Justin Herbert just being a really good quarterback, they are still able to move the ball. So that does mean that I expect them to kick a lot of field goals in the upcoming games here until those guys start coming back. But either way, I think those are probably my recommendations for kicker. Then we'll look at defense, and for defense, I'm almost entirely looking at future matchups here because there isn't really any good matchups for this specific week. So if you're looking at these defenses, I would not recommend taking any of these guys for this specific week. This is for upcoming weeks. My number one recommendation for the defenses has got to be Miami. They have the return of Jalen Ramsey, so their defense is going to be looking a little better than it did at the beginning of the season. But if you're a team that desperately needs wins to make the playoffs right now, I'm talking big yawners, or not big yawners, Mr. Steeler Girl, MILF, hell, maybe big yawners, scrambled and wiggle waggled, Justin Lake's kids. If you're a guy who needs these upcoming wins, look at Miami. Look at the schedule here. That is fucking cupcake until you get to the Final Four of the playoffs. The Raiders' offense is terrible. Now you can say that they have Devontae Adams, they have Jacoby Myers. Sure, but even though they're putting up fantasy points, they're not putting up many points in real life. That offense is horrible. The Jets' offense is horrible. We just talked about Zach Wilson and that whole offense being trash. Washington's offense is inconsistent, to say the least. They have their occasional good games, but they've been having a lot of bad games too. And I do think Miami will have a good game against them. Tennessee has the worst O-line in football, so even if Will Levis is able to make their offense seem better than it is, I do think either way they're still going to get quite a few sacks. And then they play the Jets yet again. So like I said, if you're a team that needs these upcoming wins, take Miami, because this is the way you get wins here. Because I do think they'll have quite a long stretch where they can have a lot of really good games for you following this Week 10 bye week. And then I picked Atlanta as well for a similar reason, where they have a pretty good schedule, except Atlanta is actually a team I'd more recommend if you are in a situation where you're probably going to make the playoffs, because you have that first round of the playoffs matchup where they're going to be playing against Carolina. That's going to be a really easy one. Then they have the Bears Week 17, which might have the return of Justin Fields, so it might not be as easy of a matchup. But either way, Fields' performance isn't promised. He could play like dog shit for all we know. But either way, that's a pretty good schedule to have overall, except for the Colts week and then the Buccaneers week. But they also do have that Jets game coming up, so they also have that as well. And I'm just looking at playoff matchups, like I said, for these guys. I don't think either of these defenses are elite, but those matchups are looking pretty tasty depending on your situation. You can take a look and figure whatever you think out or you need for yourself. But like I said, these matchups are looking very favorable coming into the playoffs. So then we'll take a look at the DB. Now, there actually is a pretty good DB out there. There's actually a couple. First of all, we'll take a look at Trayvon Moehrig. He's actually the number one scoring DB in all of the free agents right now. Outside of week 3, he's hit 10-plus points every single week. He has been pretty consistent. He's finding ways to make tackles. He's finding a way to get a few sacks, a few interceptions. He's finding a way to pretty much do everything. And he has been one of the main tacklers on the Raiders, outside of, I want to say, Robert Spillane is their main tackler right now. Obviously besides Max Crosby, but he's finding ways to make tackles every game. He's one of the more consistent safeties out there. Definitely recommend him. He's a solid option. And the other guy I would actually recommend is going to be Amani Hooker. For those of you who don't know, the Titans just traded away their other safety. So now Amani Hooker has been pretty much picking up the slack since he's been gone. And in the last 3 games, he's had at least 7 tackles in all of them. And this is exactly what you want to see out of a safety. This guy's actually looking really, really solid. And if you need a safety for whatever reason, Amani Hooker is looking pretty damn good for at least a 10-plus point game, especially with Kevin Byard not being there anymore. I do think his upside can only go up for those tackles. Here's where things will really fall apart, though. These defensive linemen fucking suck. I'm not going to lie. I've looked for a little bit. I could not find anyone that I actually can say I liked. But I will show you 2 guys that I think are worth mentioning. The first guy we'll mention is Zach Allen. Zach Allen has been doing pretty solid throughout the year. Not great, but he's had those games where he's been getting sacks. He's had those games where he's been getting tackles for loss. He's getting quite a few tackles overall for a lot of these games. So at least you know he has a decent level of consistency for whatever that's worth. But he's still not a great option. Don't get me wrong in the slightest. But he is showing a fair level of consistency for every week outside of week 2. The other guy I would actually recommend is more of a boomer bust type player, but it's going to be Bryce Huff. Now with Bryce Huff, he's actually had 5 sacks in the last 4 games, as you saw by that headline there. Quinnen Williams, I believe this is actually why Rick Tatership might have dropped him, has been getting double to triple covered even in every single fucking play of the last 4 or 5 games. teams are just designing their fucking game plan around stopping Quinnen Williams for whatever reason, and this is opening up Bryce Huff to go out there and get a sack almost every game. So he does have that upside, and he is playing against a very weak Raiders offensive line. So I would say give Bryce Huff a try this week if you don't like him. Oh well, like I said, he's not a great option. These defensive linemen are all inconsistent at best when it comes to the defensive line free agents for this week. But overall, yeah, it's probably the best I can recommend you. The linebackers are where things get a bit better. The linebackers aren't that bad. If I had to pick a new number one free agent option this week, we'll take a look at these two guys real quick. The first guy would be Drew Tranquill. He's a pretty solid option. He's probably going to be good for a 10-plus point week every single week with that occasional upside of doing even better with, like, say, 20 points. I don't think he'll do that every week. He's not going to go out there and be Jack Sanborn, but he does have the sack upside. He does have a decent, good tackle upside. And if you need a consistent linebacker moving forward, I would go Drew Tranquill overall. But if you're in a position where you have okay linebackers and you feel like taking a shot on a really good linebacker that might not be that great, but has a shot to be really good in the upcoming weeks. And I'm not even talking boom or bust. I'm just saying he does legitimately have a shot to start doing really good, but I can't promise it, though. I'm going to talk Zach Cunningham. This would be my new number one pick over. This would be my new number one free agent pick if I had to make another one. And the reason is Nakobe Dean, their other middle linebacker, is now out for the season, I do believe. If not, he's going to be out he's going to be on injured reserve. In the one game where we saw him not play, we saw Zach Cunningham go out there in a partial game and still get 10 tackles total. Zach Cunningham, back when he played for Houston, he had a year where he was the number one linebacker in all of fantasy with all of his tackles he's making. He is the definition of a field general linebacker, for those of you familiar with that term, where he's all over the place making tackles left and right. So is it promised that he'll be as good as potentially advertised? No, but please God, keep an eye on him because he does have ridiculous upside. You could even argue he has the upside of Jack Sanborn. And every linebacker that you've seen out of Philadelphia, or at least middle linebacker over the past few years, has always been a pretty good fantasy option. You look at guys like TJ Edwards, for example, where he was going out there and just getting a shit ton of fantasy points last season for Philadelphia. Now, am I saying it's promised? No. Like I said, these free agents fucking suck, but overall, Zach Cunningham at least has that upside. We've only seen one game of it, but the Eagles linebackers have had a history of doing really good in fantasy overall. So just keep an eye on this guy. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm sorry about the free agents not being as good this week, but we picked them clean, guys. The free agents on this whole, like, everybody that's a fucking free agent right now is horrible. I know I keep saying that, but you guys can look for yourself. If you guys find someone that you think might be good, take a shot on it. I looked for quite a while for every position trying to make this video. Heck, I even took a bit longer to make this video because of it. But god damn, these guys suck. I'll see you later.